Okay, today's going to be, a short share about the brachas for berries. Almost all the things I'm going to talk about are things that I've done in other places. So this is sort of a summary in short of those different things. Maybe some things that were not spoken about beforehand, but that's what it's going to be like. So the general rule is that what the decision of whether something is a tree or I'll use the other word, vegetable. That's the opposite of that. Is that a tree is a plant that lasts above the ground through the winter and regrows again the next year. And a vegetable does not. It doesn't make it through the winter. You have to replant it again every year. We're talking about brachas. So for brachas, if it's a fruit, if it's a tree, then what grows on that tree you make a bari pri etz on it. And if it's a vegetable, then you make a bari pri adama. And also relevant to Arla and maybe to other things as well, but we're talking about brachas. Okay, so let's go through a bunch of different vegetables. I forgot how many I have. I have 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 different ones, different berries. Okay, so the first is blueberries. So the regular blueberries that we see that you could buy in the fruit store any day of the week, those are called high bush blueberries. And they're called that because they grow on a bush that's very high. And there's no question that the proper bracha on them is 8. That's not a question at all. They last for many years. That's for sure a tree. That's for sure bari pri etz. But there's different kind of blueberries, which are known as low bush blueberries, or they also could be called wild blueberries. They grow in very specific climates. They don't grow in many places. And they grow on very low bushes. That's why they're called low bush blueberries. And another feature of them, which actually something we're going to see a couple of times today, is that they spoil very quickly. So therefore, you buy them almost always as frozen or dried or canned. Okay, and when you buy them, they often will be called wild blueberries. So there's a Taisus who brings an opinion, that any bush which grows low on the ground and grows to be less than 3 tvachim off the ground cannot be a tree, no matter what, even if it lasts through the winter like these do. So, and the bracha for those what grows on that bush is hadama. And many of the poskim say that the din should not be like that. We don't paskin like that shita. Even Tosfos doesn't like that. We don't paskin like that shita. And they say the bracha remains 8, even if it's on a low thing. But lamaisa, they also mention that the minig is that people make hadam for those kind of things, and that would include these low bush blueberries. We spoke about this some time ago when we spoke about Arla, and whether Arla applies to different kinds of blueberries. Okay, that's our first berry. Okay, next is cranberries. Now, cranberries grow in what's called bogs. It's a kind of a wetland with a very, very specific type of structure. The layers of this wetland have to be a very specific way, and it has to be a certain kind of climate. And they grow on these long vines that are growing in these wetlands. And the vines themselves can last for decades, really a long time. So there's no question that they last through the winter. But they are also, just like the low bush blueberries, they also don't grow. They only grow up to. They stay less than 3 tvachim off the ground. They just grow on the floor. Therefore, the minig would be to make hadam on them. Now, the actual minig. I'm saying that the minig is make hadama. Not sure how practical that is, so to speak, and that's because most of the people who eat cranberries are the way I think of it is you eat in a salad, you put a couple of cranberries in, it's going to be a minor ingredient. You're not going to make a special bracha. It's going to be whatever the bracha is for the whole salad. And if you use it as a cranberry sauce, which is a very popular, of course, use for it, well, then it's going to be tuffle to the food. Whatever bracha you make, pouring it onto, that's what you're going to make the bracha on that thing. Right? Cranberry juice is going to be a shahakal. Juice of everything is shahakal, just about. So then, I guess if you eat it as a craisin, so then you're actually eating the cranberry itself, with a lot of sugar in it, but you're eating the cranberry itself. So I guess for that one, you'd have to know that the bracha would then be hadam. And now let's move to strawberries. I mentioned sort of quickly when we first started that when we say something lasts through the winter, that means it's the part that's above the ground. But if the part that goes the underground parts stay through the winter, that's not enough. Okay, that's the din. The din is in Shulchan Aruch about bananas, but that's the din. It has to be the part that's above the ground. So in talking about being above the ground, the Chayadim says like this. He says, "Lo nikra eitz el mashanisha anav gam b'chayif." It has to last through the winter. V'achazem moitzi Allah. I'm sorry. Mashanisha ha'anav gam b'chayif. That there are branches through the winter. V'achrichim moitzi olav min ha'anav zeh shenishar, and then new leaves grow out of the branch that was through the ground. Vafilu hudak. Even if it's this very, very thin piece that stayed through the winter, as long as it's a branch, in contrast to if it just leaves a root. I'll get to that in a second. Okay, it has to be that leaves a branch. Okay, and that actually, and that's considered a tree if it leaves, as long as it leaves a branch. And he's saying that in contrast to the next thing he says, which is not so relevant to us, which is what happens if it leaves just a stump above the ground. I mean, it doesn't leave not just on the ground. There is something above the ground. But what it leaves above the ground is like a stump. It's not, leaves don't grow out of that. New branches will grow out of that. That, he says, it's questionable. But if there are some branches that are above the ground, branches mean the thing that leaves grow out of, then he says for sure that's considered a tree. And that is a good description of lots of strawberry varieties, which farmers will. What they do is when it comes the end of the season, the end of this, like in the fall, they cut off all the leaves and all the branches that are there, leaving just a couple of inches of branches sticking above the ground. So that's what the Chayadim says. That makes it a tree. If it lasts through the winter, even if the amount that's left is this tiny bit, as long as it's a branch, that's good enough. Okay, now a lot of people, private people who have strawberries, they just cut them out completely and replant them the next winter. Farmers, it seems, and especially for certain varieties of them, let them stay through the winter. They actually do well lasting through the winter. So in theory, this would qualify for what the Chayadim said about having branches that make it through the winter, even if they're very tiny and small. That would be enough. But Lamais is the same as we've said already in the past few things, is that the bush is usually under 3 tvachim tall, and therefore the bracha on them is going to be hadama for the same reason that it's under 3 tvachim. Now, I'll mention that there's a tshuva in Igros Moshe, a very short tshuva, which says that strawberries are hadama. It doesn't say why they're hadama. It just says strawberries. Literally, I don't remember how he spells it, but he says he means strawberries. He says that's hadama. There's also many years ago, Rabbi Frati wrote about this. And he said that brachas hadama, based partially on what I said a second ago, that it doesn't, it stays under 3 tvachim, and also some of the things I'm going to say in a second about raspberries and blackberries. Some of those stars also he brings in there also. So he also says that the bracha should be hadama. Okay, now our next berry that we're going to talk about is raspberries and blackberries, and they grow on canes. Canes like a couple of feet tall, like a stalk, sort of, that they grow off of, and they're for sure more than 3 tvachim tall. So the reason we gave for the past couple of berries of being under 3 tvachim, for sure that does not apply to raspberries and blackberries. But the place can have some other ways of identifying trees. Again, till now I've told you only one, which is so 2. I told you if it's doesn't last through the winter, it's not a tree, and if it's low to the ground, it's not a tree. But the place can give several other ways of deciding what is or is not a tree. Most of the people who are talking about that are talking about whether there's an isser of Earl on that, because Earl is only for trees. But the same thing is relevant to deciding what bracha is, which is what we're talking about today. And I'm going to say this just very briefly. The place that I'm aware of give 5 different ways of saying what makes something to be a tree. I'm going to say it like this. First, if it doesn't produce edible fruit in its first year, that's an indication that it's a tree. Or maybe say it the other way: if it makes fruit in the first year, then it's not a tree. Okay, next is in a tree, the fruit gets better and better as the tree ages. I mean, of course, to a point, but within reason, it's getting better and better, as opposed to vegetables. Even if things that are not trees means their best fruit comes early and then it peters out. Number 3, trees have solid trunks rather than hollow trunks. Number 4 and 5 are similar, and that is that the din is you're not allowed to eat arla. the first 3 years that fruit grow on a tree, not allowed to eat them. The fourth year, there's a din of Revai, that you have to eat the produce in Yerushalayim. And then the fifth year, it's completely regular, and you could do whatever you want with the fruit. So some people can say that if a tree doesn't produce fruit in it will never produce fruit in after the fourth year, starting the fourth year, or some say after the fifth year, then there's no way that could be that could be considered a tree, because the plan that the Torah gives you is eat the fruit. Don't, for the first 3 years, don't eat it. The fourth year, it should be revived, and then the fifth year, you're going to have it. If it's not going to make it to revive, or it's not going to make it to the fifth year, different cheetahs, then that's not considered a tree. Okay, so now there are different types of raspberry plants. Raspberries or blackberries, same thing, similar enough. Some produce fruit in the spring, and they have just one crop from every time a cane grows. Canes will keep on growing, but they'll only have one crop, and that will happen in the cane's second year, in the second year that it grows. And some of them are fall bearing, and they have fruits within a few months if they get planted, and then they'll have another crop the next spring that comes afterwards. So both of these types of raspberries or blackberries, both of these types, the spring bearing or the fall bearing, are qualified for a lot of the reasons. They degrade, and the fruit gets worse as the time goes on. They don't last very long. Doesn't produce. Doesn't make it to the fourth year. Doesn't make it to the fifth year. And some of them will produce fruit even in their first year. That was one of the reasons. So a lot of these different reasons apply to raspberries and blackberries as to why they're not fruit. And then the bracha, therefore, is hadama for those also. We spoke about this in more detail in the last. I think it was the very last shir on. In when we did Basbchav Taruz or Bittel and Blias, that's what we spoke about. So here today, just a shorter recap of that discussion that we had over there. Okay, our next one is Acai Berries. That's spelled Acai. It's pronounced Acai. I think I pronounced it right. And it grows on this very large palm tree, like 30, 50 feet tall. Okay, so it's for sure, from the perspective of how tall it is, no question, it's way above 3 tvachim. It's a huge, regular-looking palm tree. So from that perspective, of course, it's a fruit, and of course it's a berry pre-ate, no question. It's a regular, good old-fashioned traditional tree. It's called a berry just because of what it looks like, but it has nothing to do with the way it grows. But the issue is, they have a very, as I mentioned other ones before, it has a very short shelf life, and therefore usually they get sold as frozen purees or as juice. Okay, that's how we would usually see them. The Ramah says that the bracha for a pureed fruit or vegetable or for a juice is shahakal. So, seemingly, that should be the bracha that we would make on it if someone would use acai juice or acai pureed acai. Seemingly, the bracha should be shahakal. That's what you would guess it would be. But Rabbi Langer said, no, maybe not. Maybe we should keep the bracha of berry pre-eights, because these fruits, because they spoil so quickly, and they can't. Basically, we're not going to have a chance. Anyone's going to realistically eat them fresh. So they're being grown specifically for pureeing. That's the whole goal of why they're being grown for. And there's a rule like that. It's not the inchi adaita. When you plant it specifically for the purpose of eventually grinding or grinding or something like that, the bracha doesn't get downgraded. The bracha stays with the eights even in the hadam, whichever one it was, even when it gets ground up. Now, when we spoke about this some time ago, excuse me, we spoke about this. When we talked about bracha for different ways of changing food, there's a lot of exceptions to that rule, but that's the general rule. So he says, okay, so then it should keep the bracha of berry pre-eights because it's grown in order to be ground up like that. That's the way it's grown. Now, but there's two questions on that idea, and the first is like this: a lot of the acai berries are grown to be made into juice, and we mentioned when we spoke about this back about ground up things that there's a machlokes haposkim whether. What happens if you're not the inji adaita dohachi to make it into juice, not just into ground puree? Juice is a stronger, destruction of it, and more, less connected to the original thing. So it's a question. So here it's not the inji adaita dohachi, but the adaita to make it into juice and to puree. Well, if planted for juice, it's not so clear at all. It's not so clear at all that makes it that qualifies as something that could hold on to its bracha. That's one question. Second is, it's relatively recent, maybe 10 or 20 years, that that acai has become popular in the United States. And before that, excuse me, people ate it. Before that, the only people who were eating it were the people where these places where it grew, like in places in South America. Excuse me, like Brazil is a big grower, and other places in South America. And those places, those people eat them whole. They still do, because for them, the fact that it doesn't last long is not so relevant. For us, that's because it has to get all the way from there to here. So it's by the time it gets here, it won't be worth anything. But those people keep eating it whole. So would we say that it's being not the inchi, they're growing it to be pureed? Is that really true? Because the local people keep eating them whole. They're not eating it. It's not grown for those people to eat pureed. Does it maybe depend on what percentage of the growth is for local consumption and how much is for export to America? Does it depend? Maybe it depends on like this. Maybe if they planted like certain new fields of these trees specifically for export, those were adaita dahachi to be pureed, but the ones that are for local were not adaita dahachi to be pureed. Maybe that's what it depends on. Not really so clear to me. So, and if you think about it, also is that this is an example where it's not two different species of fruit, that one is for pureeing and one is for eating whole. It's not different countries growing it. It's the exact same berry, just that this box goes to the market locally and this box goes to the United States. So it can't be like it says. If your local eats it pureed, makes a hakel. If a person in America eats puree, he makes a ha'etz. That sounds like a little strange to say that. So see, you have to figure out what the bracha is for it correctly, and then work it from there. Now so this is a question whether this or how to treat this. Is this not ichedai? Now another angle of this is that when we spoke about it back then about pureed foods, etc. I said there that the people say like this. Poskim say like this: tomatoes, the types of tomatoes that are made into tomato sauce are planted to be made into tomato sauce. It's not the regular tomatoes we eat you buy in the fruit store, and they are not the ijra. Even so, we make shahakal on that thing, and that's because if you have something which the pureed version, the poskim say like this. The thing that you puree will never be eaten as is. It will always be a tuffle to something else. Like think about tomato sauce. Tomato sauce is part of pizza. Tomato sauce is ketchup with your French fries. It's always tuffle to something else. Then if it is like that, then that doesn't qualify as not the inchi adaita dahachi. Okay, that's not such a thing. So like for example, I mentioned before about cranberries. Cranberries is like that also. Cranberry sauce is eaten always as a tuffle to something else. So it's hard. We don't say in that case it's not the inchi adaita dahachi and keep its original bracha. So the acai berries is a question how to look at that. It probably, even if you make an acai bowl, which has it's like a layers of. Okay, I'll get to exactly what it is, but it's not the majority of the food. It's a percentage of the food. Maybe a significant percentage is probably not the majority of the food. So on the one hand, it's always a tuffle, but on the other hand, not really a tuffle, because like it's called an acai bowl because that's like the feature of what people are buying this for. So seemingly we can't say that it's just secondary. It's always a tuffle. This is not like ketchup. Okay, it's not tuffle because it is a significant part of it. So seemingly that wouldn't take away from being not the inshadai dachi. Now, whatever you think the right bracha is on the acai, whether as you might guess at the pureed is shahakal, or Rabbi Langer is suggesting maybe it's AIDS, and we're not so sure about that. It stays like that. But you have to remember that people don't just pretty common that people eat it with other food. They don't eat it by themselves. They put it with yogurt. They eat it layered into an acai bowl or something like that. So in these kind of cases, you're going to really have to look at the rules of ikar v'tafel to decide what the bracha is. Now, of course, you'll need to know what bracha the acai is itself, because that'll play into the ikar v'tafel rules. But you're going to have to look at the whole picture to decide what the final bracha is going to be. Okay, and our last berry that we're going to talk about is we spoke about this not so long ago, that there are two different plants that are both called currants. I hope I pronounced that right. Currants. One of them is a type of grape, and the other one is a berry that grows on a bush. The bush that it grows on, the one that grows on a bush, is more than 3 tvachim tall. So therefore, it's a tree. And because of that, the bracha on Rishon on both of these, both types of currants, whether it's the grape type or the berry type, is Berachos. So that's good. That's easy enough. The bracha achroina will depend, because the one that's a grape one, the bracha achroina is al eitz al pri eitz, because it's a grape, and the one that's a berry one is bar nefesh, like all other fruits and vegetables. And at the time when we spoke about this not so long ago, we spoke about different kinds of things about stam yain. I mentioned a bunch of different ways of calling these. There are other names that it goes by besides just currant, different colors, no less. And yeah, you can listen there.